Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first lesson of world history. I'm excited to be here. World history is my very favorite thing to teach, and yeah, I don't see any need to delay too much. Let's go ahead and get started. Our lesson today is remote as opposed to live. Most days I'll be live streaming through either notes or assignments to help you guys out. But today we are looking at what's called the Historian's Toolbox, which is a set of materials that we use in studying history. Throughout this first unit, I'm going to have the important material, the stuff that needs to make its way to your notes, underlined. So what I would do is either have this video on and word processor or your notebook out and write down the stuff that's underlined. Starting in our next unit, the underlines are going to go away. You're going to need to start to interpret your own stuff and figure out what's important. So we are starting with the Historian's Toolbox and looking at 4 very important tools for how we study history. This is more exciting than it sounds. Okay, so first we're going to just very quickly define what the word history means. The word history is actually from the Greek word historia, which means asking questions. Technically it means inquiry, whatever. It gets its name from this guy here on the side of your screen. Let me grab a pen and draw a mustache on him. He's already got a mustache, but you know, there we go. Just a nice little handlebar. Anyway, it gets its name from this guy, Herodotus, who wrote a book about some wars that had took place. If you've seen either of the 300 films, they're not great history, but it was the same conflict. And he sailed from point A to point B to point C, asking questions, interviewing people, and in those interviews, he threw out some of the stuff he didn't think was real. That's where we get the term history. From Herodotus onward, we have used this set of tools, and so we're going to go into the Historian's Toolbox now. First tool that we use is our, sources. Historians tend to use 3 types of sources when we perform research. We've got primary sources, which were written either at the time of the event or very close to it. So if I'm talking to you about a battle that took place in 1066, our primary sources are going to be stuff from around that time period. Secondary sources are sources written after the fact, usually many years after the fact. That same battle, new books about it come out all the time. So I might pull from a book that was written in 2020. Fairly obviously, anybody who was alive at the time of the event, not alive anymore. So secondary sources are written after the fact. That's generally what us historical types do. If I sit down and do some research and write a book about it, I have written a secondary source. Lastly, we have artifacts. Artifacts are these special types of sources that usually don't have much writing. Think old cities, statues, even dung pits. Yes, that's ancient toilets if you're wondering. And you'd be surprised how useful a tool poop can be in studying history. I probably could have phrased that better. So we do need to look at how we read these sources because I will go ahead and let you know a lot of this course is going to be either reading primary or secondary sources and answering questions about them. Once again, don't be above pausing to go through the underlined stuff and write it down. Primary sources are what we use most of the time for history. We use them to learn about historical events and determine how people at the time felt about major events. Were they overjoyed at their empire's victory? Were they saddened at the death of a king in battle? So on and so forth. Primary sources are not perfect. They have problems, and we're going to talk about those on and off throughout our class, but here are the general ones that exist pretty much in all primary sources. One, they can be difficult to read. First of all, a lot of primary sources have to be translated. This one that you're looking at right here is it's written in Persian, ancient Persian. I can't read that, and if you can, I'm jealous because it's actually a really cool inscription located in modern Iran. Um, but even when translated into English, a lot of these sources sound weird. You'll see that we're going to do a primary source activity on ancient legal codes, and you're going to read it and go, what does this mean? And that's okay because it's one of those weird, highfalutin phrases. Um, Primary sources also tend to have a whole lot of bias. For most of history, the people writing primary sources were higher ups. They were the wealthy and the powerful. We don't know how the common man on the ground felt about a whole lot of stuff throughout history. And that's before you factor in stuff like most societies didn't teach women to write until about the past 200 years or so. Um, so keep all that sort of stuff in mind as we study primary sources. They're good, but they're not perfect. Secondary sources are generally piles of interpreted primary sources. Your history book in class, if we ever get back to being in person, that's going to be a secondary source. They usually tend to be easier to read because they're designed to be digestible for a modern audience, and they usually involve some research done by professional historians, not just taking primary sources at face value. They're not perfect either. You still have bias. There are still, go to a local bookstore sometime and you can find historical sources that are trying to get you to think one way or the other. Um, we'll talk about some of that stuff when we get to both the Roman Empire and the Mongols. Genghis Khan comes to mind right away. And because they're written after the fact, secondary sources don't always have a perfect picture of events. Think about it this way. If something happened to you in first period, and then, this is assuming a normal school day, and then you were asked about it at the end of sixth period the next day, your memory of that event probably isn't going to be perfect. And this is made even worse, of course, through the years of history where books get burnt, monuments fall, cities get sacked, and in historical periods with little writing, sometimes our whole sourcing is based on pathetically little. The entire history of Britain from the 500s to the 1000s is based on 3 books. So keep all that in mind. Secondary sources aren't perfect either. Artifacts are cool. They're a lot more accessible to you and I if we can't read stuff. I can't read ancient Persian, I can't read Latin, I can't read Sanskrit, but I can tell you that this is a statue, and I can tell you certain characteristics about it. Artifacts do have problems too. You can misinterpret them. They can be damaged, they can be broken, and sometimes they don't tell us a full story. This statue, I didn't choose it randomly. This statue is one of my favorite things in all of history. It's, for those of you who know a little bit about history, it's clearly a statue from India. It's got all the characteristics of an Indian goddess called Lakshmi, but we found it in an ancient Roman city called Pompeii. How did it get there? We don't really know. So keep in mind, artifacts are fun. We're going to look at a lot of them in our class, but they can also be misinterpreted. Okay, that was a lot. Don't worry, our last 3 tools go a lot faster. Tool number 2 is maps. You are going to see a lot of maps in this class. I do not apologize. Mapping is absolutely critical to understanding any aspect of history. My favorite teacher in high school, who of course was a history teacher, once said that geography is the stage on which history takes place. I mean, World War II, a fairly recent event, large portions of World War II were determined by the fact that Russia is cold. All right, so geography matters, mapping matters. Throughout our course, we're going to look at a lot of different maps. I will help you interpret them because I know geography isn't taught too much anymore. Got to watch what I say, I'm on camera. But we'll show historical change. We'll see where people live, why people live there, how stuff has changed. And map reading is a critical skill not only for a historian, but also for your day-to-day life. Tool number three, of course, are graphs. Graphs and other data demonstrations are very useful to show what has changed and what hasn't changed. And if you look at this graph here, this graph gives you an idea of why a major event around 1800, I know my head is currently blocking the last couple dates, a major event around 1800 happened that really changed the way humans live. If you look at this graph here, humanity didn't hit the 1 billion mark until roughly 1800, and it's 2020, and we are rapidly approaching the 8 billion mark. What changed? Well, stay tuned. We'll talk about that eventually. Last one, number four, dates. Dating is very, very important in history, but I know a lot of you guys probably have sat through a history class where it's like, oh, more dates. We use general dates here in world history. We do not sit down. You will not be expected to recite a single date in my class. You will be expected to know the general flow of things. If you're telling me that Napoleon lived around the same time as Nelson Mandela, we got a problem. But other than that sort of thing, you're not going to see a lot of dates in here, except to help you put stuff in order. We use timelines to order dates. You can see this timeline here, which is actually of the life of Genghis Khan. And we sort dates into two categories, BCE and CE. That's before the Common Era and Common Era. You will also see from time to time BC and AD, before Christ, Anno Domini. Both of those cover the same set of years. We're using BCE and CE to reduce the religious implications found in dating, but a lot of our sources use BC and AD. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just the one telling you about that. But yeah, dating is an important aspect of history, but it can be overblown. And, you know, dating's overrated. At least that's what I keep telling myself. That's how I got through high school. Anyway, thank you guys for staying tuned. I hope this wasn't too overwhelming or too much. Remember, you can always go back through this and look for the underlined stuff. That's what I want you to have in your notes in case I have to do a notebook check or drop a quiz in on the Historian's Toolbox. Thank you for your time. I look forward to teaching you live in a couple of days.